Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Acciona, as member of both the Spain-Australia Council Foundation and the European-Australian Business Council, it's a great pleasure to welcome Australian and Spanish guests to this working lunch. Allow me to express our warmest welcome to Spain to the Australian delegation of the European-Australian Business Council, led by the Minister of Commerce and Investments, Honourable Andrew Robb. I would like to extend our greetings to Ambassador Jane Hardy, who has always been an excellent partner in any initiative from the Spain-Australia Council Foundation. Thank you very much, Ambassador, as well. Our deepest gratitude as well to Chairman Alastair Walton for visiting Spain with such a distinguished delegation. And my best wishes to all of you for a fruitful and successful working lunch. Before we start with the speeches, we would like to briefly introduce our country to the Australian delegation with a video presentation made by Marca España. Marca España's goal is to improve the image of our country, domestically and abroad, and they have prepared this video to show how the real Spain is today. Now, it's a great honor to introduce you to Chairman Villarmir, who kindly hosts this working lunch. Mr. Villarmir served as Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs and Minister of Treasury in the first government of the Spanish monarchy, and is Chairman of the Spain-Australia Council Foundation and OHL, one of the largest international concession and construction groups. In addition, Chairman Villarmir holds the position of Second Deputy Chairman of Abertis, Vice Chairman of Inmobiliaria Colonial, and External Board Independent Member of Santander Bank. As the host of this working lunch, Chairman Villarmir will welcome both delegations and brief you about Spain-Australia bilateral relations and cooperation. Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Honourable Minister for Trade and Investment of Australia, Mr. Andrew Robb, Your Excellency the Minister of Defence of Spain, Mr. Pedro Morenés, Your Excellency the Ambassador of Australia, Mrs. Jane Hardy, Honourable Secretaries of State, Chairman of the European-Australian Business Council, Mr. Walton, dear Australian and Spanish friends. On behalf of the Spain-Australia Council Foundation, I wish to express our warmest welcome to this European-Australia Business Council, distinguished delegation headed by Minister Robb. Thank you, Chairman Walton, for having organized this trip to Spain and for having accepted to hold this lunch with us. I wish you all a pleasant and fruitful stay among us. I am convinced that you will find a cooperative government, a cutting-edge business sector, and an open and friendly society in Spain. Let me also thank the Spanish Minister of Defense for his continuous support to the Foundation. We were honored with his presence in Melbourne last year at the official launch in Australia of the Spanish-Australia Council Foundation that I am very pleased to chair. And we were honored and very honored today with your presence, Mr. Minister, here with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. In spite of the geographical distance between Spain and Australia, our two countries are becoming progressively closer, thanks to an increasingly fluid bilateral relationship based on common values, common strategies, and interests in a globalized world. Our relation received an important trust when Their Majesties King Juan Carlos I and Queen Sofia visited Australia in 2009. And later, when the former Governor-General of the Commonwealth in Australia, the Honourable Quentin Bryce, travelled to Spain in 2011. Today, the fact that His Majesty Philip VI has decided to maintain in his schedule the audience initially accepted when he was Crown Prince, and the maintenance of this audience certainly testifies to Australia's relevance for our foreign policy. When Australia was first included on the priority list of our integral market development policy, there was only a very limited Spanish presence in Australia. 8 years later, today, things have evolved positively, and many Spanish companies we are now established in your country. And some of the Spanish companies are offering a fairly relevant contribution in sectors as important as infrastructure, as renewable energies, as water treatment management, as defense, as financial services, as consumer goods, among others. Our businessmen have a good image, and their skills, expertise, and professionalism are widely known. As an example of this, I may remember that today, in the two pre-selected consortia for the largest infrastructure project in the history of Australia, the Melbourne East-West Link, there are Spanish companies pre-qualified. Now, our challenge is to keep the momentum of this rich bilateral relationship and to strive to open new chapters that allow our countrymen to work even closer in the near future, either in Australia or in Spain, or together in any other point of the planet. Rest assured that the Spanish-Australia Council Foundation will continue to work in this direction. It would be wonderful if we could cooperate with another similar Australian counterpart. We are now dealing with this possibility, who will share with us this purpose of fostering the bilateral relations between our two civil societies. We shall really welcome any proposal or suggestion in this regard from our Australian friends. In the meantime, you will always find engaged and committed business leaders in Spain, not only because we are all now global companies, but especially today because our priority is Australia. I am personally committed to this end. The whole foundation, Spanish-Australia relation, is committed in this field, and I am convinced that all that will lead to a win-win scenario for all of us. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Now, Mrs. Alejandra Quintelan, leading expert in macroeconomic analysis and Senior Vice President of Banco Santander Group in the Communications, Marketing and Research Division, will brief you about the current situation and future perspective of the Spanish economy. Alejandra, please, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Chairman Villarmir, for the invitation. Ministers, ambassadors, thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here today. I've been asked to stop. Yes. ¿Tengo que hacer algo yo? ¿Funciona? Yes? Bueno, hablo desde aquí, si no. I've only been given 6 minutes to talk to you about the Spanish economy, so I can't really... Thank you. Gracias. So I have been asked to talk to you very briefly about the Spanish economy. In fact, only 6 or 7 minutes, so that's very brief. And the good news is that we have turned the corner. That's the conclusion of the presentation, and I will go into the details. To know where we are and where we're going, I think it's important to start talking about where we come from. And here in this graph, it's very clear that we outperformed our European peers, the Eurozone average in GDP growth during many years. As you know, we had a very dynamic economy. Once we joined the monetary union, our interest rates came structurally down. We were able to attract a lot of immigration. We had a good and very dynamic labor force. We created a lot of employment. We had a big housing and construction boom. That had many good results, as I say, employment creation, very dynamic export sector, etc. But of course, we also accumulated some disequilibria, which I have mentioned here. High inflation, which led to a loss on competitiveness relative to our peers, external deficit and debt, increasing corporate and household debt also, and the issues that the housing boom also created for our financial sector, in particular for our savings banks, the cajas de ahorro. So this means that when the international financial and economic crisis hit Spain, we had a recession like the rest of the world, really. But now we are lagging behind in the recovery, or we have been lagging behind in the recovery, as you see here. The good news is that we have been dealing with these disequilibria very successfully in the last few years. And as I say, we are now turning the corner in terms of growth. The situation of our domestic economy was also made a bit more complicated by the situation in Europe. As you know, we had, only 2 years ago, markets were questioning the sustainability of the euro. They were concerned about highly indebted countries like Spain and others, where the financial sector was also facing problems. So they saw a vicious circle between sovereign and banking debt that we needed to resolve. Here we see the risk premia of Spain that reached 600 basis points in 2012, in the summer of 2012. The good thing about this is that the answer of the European authorities was more Europe, and this has certainly helped. Draghi came out and said, I will do whatever it takes to save the euro, and the European politicians also came out and said, we're going to take additional measures to integrate Europe. We're going to move towards a banking union. And this, as we see here, has had very positive results in our risk premia, allowing it to come down. And of course, the decline in funding costs has definitely also helped our recovery. I like this quote by Romano Prodi, who was chairman of the European Commission when the euro notes were introduced in 2002. Maybe you can't read it, but basically what he said is, I am sure that the euro will oblige us to introduce a new set of economic policy instruments in the future. It is politically impossible to do so now, but one day we will have a crisis and we will be forced to move towards further integration. Well, we have had the crisis, and we are now definitely moving towards further integration. We will have a banking union as of November of 2014, because we will have a single supervisor for banks, and this will certainly improve the confidence in our financial sector across Europe. So the European situation is helping, but we, at the same time, in Spain, have been doing a lot of homework to deal with those disequilibria that I mentioned at the beginning. I like to call this the silent adjustment, because it's something that sometimes does not make the headlines in the press. The headlines in the past few years in Spain have been dominated by recession, unemployment, etc. But the fact is that we were working in strengthening the foundations of our economy. And we see that here in these 3 columns. The adjustment that the private sector has done has been really impressive. We will see some graphs in a minute. Deleveraging, improving competitiveness with higher productivity, cost control. We have also shifted our growth model towards more exports, and we will see that in a minute. At the same time, the government was leading very, very significant structural reforms in the labor market, for example, making it much more flexible. We will see the results that this reform is already having in our employment numbers. Fiscal policy, a lot of, reduction, cost control also, of course, significant reforms, even constitutional limits to the degree of indebtedness that our regions and our central government can assume, tax changes, pension reform, single market policies also. Spain had become a very decentralized country, and there is also a reform that enables companies that are present here to work throughout the country without such tight obstacles and controls throughout the regions in Spain. So that was a very significant reform. And finally, the public administration, streamlining the public administration is another reform that is very significant. Finally, the financial system, of course. As I mentioned, our cajas, savings banks, were not banks as we properly call them. They were not listed companies. They had a different governance and a different market incentives than banks really have. So they were they had significant problems throughout the financial crisis, and they have gone through a very, very significant restructuring, increasing capital ratios, and a lot of consolidation. We will see that in the next few graphs. Here we see how the private sector has, shifted their financial situation from a recession, both in the corporate and in the household sector, to a positive surplus here. So they have excess financing capacity, which is very good news to start investing once, of course, the situation, the prospects increase and credit starts to flow into companies. That process is already starting to take place. This situation here was absolutely necessary for growth to begin. On the other graph, we see our real estate sector and how, of course, the housing boom became a bust throughout the crisis. We are now, the level of housing starts in our economy is down to what it was in the 1960s, so we really don't think it can go much lower than that. I think we have definitely touched bottom in the real estate sector, and that's good news, both in quantities and in prices, almost in prices. And that means that the real estate sector will not be a drag on growth looking forward. Exports, again, another very significant shift in our economy. Here we see how we have become very competitive. Our unit labor costs have come down much more than our trade partners in Europe, and that has meant that our exports have increased and have outperformed even Germany's, which is something that we always recall. Our export to GDP has increased from 27% to 35%, which is where Italy, even more, than Italy and France, not yet Germany. Germany is at 50% of GDP, so we still have some room for improvement, but we are definitely in the right direction, and that is something that you will probably be able to testify with the companies who are present here, who are all very, very international. In terms of all this is very well reflected in our current account balance. We were in very significant deficit, 10% of current account balance, very high financing needs, and we have corrected that in a very, very quick way. As we see here, we are already in surplus of almost 2% of GDP. Similarly, there has been a very significant adjustment in the fiscal front, and our government has in fact just announced, a few weeks ago, that its fiscal deficit objective for this year is more ambitious than it was in previous months, and it will probably be around 5.5%. ¿Ese he sido yo? ¿Qué hago? Okay, this is what I meant when I mentioned a very significant reform in and restructuring process in our financial sector. The picture in the left-hand side is the 45 savings banks that we used to have competing in Spain. Many of those have disappeared or have consolidated, and now the picture is very different as we see it in the other picture, and they are no longer non-listed companies. They're actually listed banks that have the same corporate governance that the rest of the banks have. At the same time, we have increased the financial system in general has increased very significantly its levels of provisions and capital, and we are well prepared for the stress test that, as you know, we're going through, and when the results we will see in October when the ECB publishes the results. Finally, our labor market, very, very important. I mentioned we had a reform to flexibilize our labor market, to improve our wage bargaining process, which was very rigid, to decrease or to lower firing costs, and to make it in general much more flexible. We see here the impact that this has had. Still, with low growth in Spain, we have been able to create employment. We have had excellent employment data this week, just published. So we see here how employment creation is evolving very well. It's true, we still have a very high unemployment rate, but it is coming down. We forecast that in the second quarter we will see the unemployment rate below 25%. I know it sounds very high. Official figures possibly also are a bit distorted by some characteristics that our market has, but nevertheless, we hope that this will gradually also come down, and that will certainly be the biggest challenge that our economy has. So what are our prospects? We are already forecasting growth close to 1.5% this year, and close to 2% in 2015. We have already seen three quarters of positive growth in Spain, and that will definitely consolidate in the future. This growth is driven right now by investment and by exports. I think consumption will also join eventually, but of course still in a slower pace given the high unemployment rate that I mentioned. But as we see here, investment is definitely picking up very significantly. And these growth rates, as you know, are already, again, outperforming the European average both this year and next year. So that's, I think, very good news. In conclusion, we have, after a very long expansionary cycle, we accumulated these disequilibria. We have been doing our homework, dealing with these disequilibria, both in the private and in the public sector. Very significant reforms, and as a result, the economy is turning the corner, and hopefully we will be able to share better news with you next year and the years ahead. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alejandra. Now it's time to leave the floor to Australian representatives. First, Mr. Graham Cray will introduce Minister Andrew Robb. Mr. Cray is chairman of BlueScope Steel, member of the board of governors of CEDA, and a director of European Australian Business Council. He was previously chairman of National Australia Bank and a director of News Corporation. His executive career spanned 30 years as CEO of a number of businesses in the diversified industrial and wine sectors. Right after the introduction given by Mr. Cray, Minister Robb will brief us about the Australian economy and bilateral business cooperation. Mr. Cray, the floor is yours.
Minister Morenes, Ambassador Hardy, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Australian Business Council, it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce you to you the Australian Minister for Trade and Investment, the Honourable Andrew Robb. It's particularly pleasing for me to have this opportunity here in Spain, because my company Brambles, which is one of the 20 largest companies on the Australian Stock Exchange, operates in 60 countries around the world, and of those 60 countries, the third biggest market for us is here in Spain. So at any one time, out of the 400 million pallets and crates we have around the world, there'll be some 25 million of them here in Spain. So I'm delighted to be here at a time when the Spanish economy is starting to grow again. I'm also particularly delighted to be able to introduce the Minister to you, because he is a fairly rare politician in Australia. Rare in the sense that there are very few politicians, unfortunately, in Australia who have a business background and have worked in business. Minister Robb is one of those very few. He's had a long business career in agriculture in particular, but in other business sectors. So he brings a real understanding of business to his role, and his role is particularly important for Australia as we head towards the G20, where the focus is on global growth led by trade, led by investment. Andrew Robb is the perfect Minister to be leading that Australian initiative. I'm very pleased to introduce him. Please welcome him.
Well, thank you very much, Graham, for that, those kind words. And can I just say to all of our Spanish friends here today, what a great privilege it is to be here in Madrid alongside the European Australian Business Council delegation. We have, fortunately, a most distinguished group of business people from Australia that have joined this delegation, and I think I'm very proud of the fact that we've got this level of representation, and hopefully it will send a very strong signal to all of our Spanish hosts here about the significance that we attach to the relationship and the intent that we've got to build it further. I do thank the Spain-Australia Council Foundation for hosting this event and also for the welcoming introduction from its chairman, Mr. Vima Mur. And I thank you for that. I know, and I have been briefed on several occasions about your commitment to growing the relationship. And I think it's very timely, in fact, because one, because of the most impressive recovery that we've just been witness to with that economic presentation. Secondly, there's a new king of Spain. In fact, I think today we've got the great privilege of being the first public foreign group to meet with, to have a council with the king, and that's a great privilege for us. But the other thing is that I think this delegation arrives at a time when we have seen over the last 7 years in particular the arrival, if you like, or the second arrival. The first arrival of the Spanish was before anyone else, frankly, other than the indigenous community. And, you know, if Captain Cook hadn't stolen the maps from Spain, I might be able to speak much better Spanish, right? But the second arrival has been the tier one companies that have now become a permanent feature of the Australian business community in a very short period of time, really over the last 7 years. And it was Navantia, of course, I think, which led the charge. It's played a very dynamic role in Australia, a major $13 billion contract. And I do think that the demonstration effect that Navantia has had has, to our great benefit, led to other companies. I think there's now 100 companies, and certainly I think nearly all your tier one companies are now active in Australia. And the chairman went through before the sorts of areas that they're involved in, but we're now after the tier two. So we're here looking to reinforce the tier one, but also to attract some of the tier two, because there's so much that we are already benefiting. The arrival of your major construction companies has injected a very healthy measure of competition into that space. Secondly, it has brought with it wonderful expertise and IP, and the capacity to inject into our infrastructure build over the next few years. And it coincides with the fact that as a new government, our number one priority from an economic point of view at the moment, other than structural changes which will bring a benefit in the medium term, but the immediate factor is a major infrastructure agenda. In fact, our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has said on a number of occasions that whenever he leaves the post as Prime Minister, he would hope that he'd be known as the infrastructure Prime Minister. So it's his way of explaining to everyone in Australia, but broader afield, that's where we're focusing, and I'll get to that. I'm also honoured to meet here today with Defence Minister Morandis, the Secretary of State for State, Mr. Garcia Lagarde. You see what happened when the Spanish didn't hang around? It's your fault, you know. And Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Di Benito, who I had the pleasure of 40 minutes or more this morning with. It's a great privilege. You do all of us a great honour to come and join us today, and I'm looking forward to further contact. You know, the other thing was, I think the last time Australia competed against Brazil, we lost 3-0, so 3 goals to love, and so we thought this time we might come along and cooperate rather than compete, right? So could I just make some comments about the Australian economy and why I think there's so much merit in the companies that are there taking their involvement to even greater levels, and secondly, for others in Spain to join them. We are very keen to build a commercial relationship, and we do think there are opportunities which we need to capitalise on. It's our own self-interest we're looking at. We need to capitalise on some enormous opportunities that are emerging for Australia, but we need the assistance of certain types of companies and expertise, and a significant proportion of that does reside in Spain. The opportunities that I'm talking about are really driven by, as I see it, 3 factors. The first thing is that the emergence in recent years, last 10 or 15 years, but it's accelerated enormously, of quite spectacular growth and movement of people out of poverty into the middle class in the region around us. From India through to China and every country in between, every emerging economy in between, there's currently about 600 million people in the middle class. It's anticipated that within 30 to 40 years, not 100 years, not 50 years, but within 30 to 40 years, there will be something of the order of 3 billion people in the middle class. So from 600 million to 3 billion, it's almost inconceivable. And it's going to present phenomenal opportunities and some big challenges. But again, the expertise that I know resides in this country, and a lot of it we've got ourselves, but we need to put the two together. It is going to be the century of food and water and energy security. And again, there is a synergy that we've got between our 2 countries and our 2 business sectors, which can make a big contribution to dealing with the opportunities, but what will clearly be some big challenges across the region in that regard. We're already seeing the spectacular growth. 2 years ago, we sold 60,000 tonnes of beef to China. That made them number 12th in our client list. Last year, we sold 260,000 tonnes of beef to China. That made them number 3. It's just, I could give you many examples like this, where there's opportunities for the world, but we are so well placed in Australia. We're in the same time zone, and I've run companies. I ran the Australian arm of a US company for a while, and I've run companies into Asia. And being in different time zone is an issue. It can be very difficult, and I think for that reason, companies that are based in Australia that have a base, a strong base, in many ways as a stepping stone or a gateway into the region, makes a lot of sense. You're in your emails, your phone calls, and your travel is overnight. It's 8 or 9 hours just about anywhere into Asia from Australia, but you sleep. You sleep if you can sleep on a plane, which I can, fortunately. But so the proximity is something that people underestimate. The other thing is that in Australia we've got 23 million people, and 2 million of those 23 million citizens speak an Asian language in their home. So in other words, that's their primary language. And most of those speak Mandarin. Right? So there we have 2 million Asians who, many of them already, of course, are in one way or another assisting many companies in Australia with the linkages and the cultural nuances that are important in order to do business and to build trust. That's so essential to doing good business. You know, we've got not only China, but we've got Indonesia with nearly 275 million people. It's currently about 60 million people in the middle class. It's on our doorstep. It is expected that within 10 years, the economy in Indonesia will be bigger than Germany's. So the opportunities again from a stepping stone point of view, are enormous. And you know, we've got strong regulation. We've got the business language of English, which is spoken very well through most parts of Asia, in the business sectors at least. And we're also building very strong relationships. We've just signed a free trade agreement with South Korea. Next week, Prime Minister Abe is in Australia. We signed the Japanese free trade agreement. And I'm that close to a Chinese free trade agreement, I hope. I haven't put the moz on myself. But hopefully before the end of the year, we'll do China. Now, those three countries represent 51% of all of our exports. And 80% of our exports go to 8 of the top 10 countries in the ASEAN. Right? So we are commercially well connected. So I suppose my point is that those companies that establish a strong reputation within Australia will benefit from the endorsement as they move into major projects in the region, will benefit from the endorsement of the Australian business sector, which is well known and well respected throughout the region. So that's the first opportunity. The second opportunity, or the second factor driving the opportunities, is our determination as a government, and again I can see some significant parallels here in Spain, to replace what has emerged in the last few years as debt-funded excessive government spending. We're looking to replace that with strong growth of the private sector. Now, if you look at growth in Australia over the last 10 years, the last 6 or 7 since the financial crisis, a lot of it has been from mining and resources and energy, which we've been blessed with, and there's been a boom on. But most of the rest of the growth has been government spending, and a lot of it borrowed money. And as a new government, we're going to live within our means, because we're going to stop crowding out the small and medium businesses in Australia. And when you've got a government in the market every day, buying $100 million worth of, or selling $100 million worth of bonds and taking that money out of the system, it has had a material effect on our small and medium business sector, which is the innovation centre of Australia in many respects. So we're looking to displace big government in all its forms, regulations. We had our first repeal day recently, as we call it. Every 6 months we're going to have a repeal day. The last 6 years we saw a 21,000 net increase in regulations federally. 2 months ago we removed 10,000. And next 6 months we'll have another repeal day. And every 6 months for as long as we're in office, we'll have a repeal day where we've now got, the Prime Minister's got in his office an assistant minister whose job it is to ensure that we keep deregulating. And it's the first time in my 35 years in and around politics that I've seen, 2 cabinet ministers walking down a corridor bragging to one another about some obscure regulation that they've discovered that they're going to remove that's costing business money. So it's a material and significant factor, I think, because if we are to capture as a country the advantages that I just talked about in Asia, we have to be as lean and as competitive and as low cost. We're always going to be, we're a high cost country, but we've got to be as low cost as we can. We've removed the carbon tax, or we will do next week. We had a carbon tax across the country when no one else has had one. Our competitors haven't had one. We had a mining tax, no one else had one. We're removing all those and we're stripping away the regulation. If we're not going to spend money on business, the best thing we can do is help reduce their costs by dealing with so much of the regulation. The third thing, is the tapering of the construction phase of the resources and energy boom. Though I think there's still a fair bit left in energy, but the construction phase has underpinned a lot of growth, as I mentioned, and it has led us to embark on a very aggressive program. And I just wanted to share one policy to give you the sense of what's in prospect. And it's not words, it's being backed up by action. A few weeks ago, about 7 weeks ago, we had our first budget. One of the major initiatives, as well as trying to live within our means, there's a lot of cost cutting and slowing of growth of spending, but those things we do well, we do as well as anyone and better than most. We've looked to promote those areas. Now, infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, is fundamental to replacing the government. If you're going to replace government spending, you've got with private sector activity. Well, we have to replace it with private sector activity, or otherwise we'll trash the economy. And what we announced was a policy called asset recycling. And what it involves is that the national government, federal government, we're in a strong federation, we have announced that any state government that chooses to privatise one of their assets, port, rail, road, water, management, power, poles and wires, whatever it might be, if they choose to privatise a major piece of infrastructure, if they put that money back into another piece of infrastructure, the federal government will give a 15% bonus on the sale price of that first piece of infrastructure. Now, since that announcement, the three major states in the last 3 to 4 weeks have announced something close to $60 billion worth of privatisations. We have now, in our discussions with the states, identified and can see how we're going to fund $125 billion worth of infrastructure over the next 6 years. And a lot of it is, a number of those will come out of the ground, turn the first sod in the third quarter this year. So $125 billion worth of privatisations, and now the beauty of this is you're getting brownfields projects, and then by definition you've got to get a greenfields project because otherwise they don't get the bonus. And it has given political cover. It has been a response which we haven't anticipated to date, but it's far better than we had anticipated, because a lot of our community are not still not that happy with privatisations, but if it's put back into other infrastructure, they're much more comfortable with it, and that's what's going to happen. So I do think, we're going to see some enormous opportunities that, and as was mentioned earlier, one of our biggest projects coming up, something like $13 billion worth, the East-West Tunnel. The 3 bids that were in is back to 2 bids, but the 3 bids had a Spanish partner in each one. And typically we're now seeing across the country with a lot of these big projects a very active involvement and a very welcome involvement by those Spanish firms. I think I've said enough. I've given you a little flavour of what's happening down there. We are, like the government here, we are determined to push on with a lot of structural change, but we need higher and higher levels of productivity. And the more that we can attract companies that are world leaders, and as I understand it, in the top 10 construction companies in the world, Spain has 6 of them. And I think all 6 are now in Australia in one way or another. As I said earlier, it brings innovation, it brings IP, it brings expertise. We're the better for it. We'll be better, leaner and more productive in tackling and taking advantage of all the other opportunities that are around and that are emerging. And I just do think that the timing of this visit is most important and appropriate. We are a country and a government which is seeking to provide stability and certainty in an investment world which is far from stable and certain. And again, I think those sorts of characteristics can be very attractive. Today's lunch is the fruit of the Spain-Australia Council Foundation's good work, and I do congratulate you again and the Foundation on its recognition of the importance of greater ties. I hope you can see from some of my comments there are a whole range of reasons why now is the most appropriate time to take our relationship to another level. I think our people, certainly I can speak for Australians, are very fond of the Spanish, and there is a comfort in dealing with the Spanish population which may not exist with others for all sorts of reasons. But so I think we can do good business together, and we can broaden our relationship in a cultural sense and every other way, which is always important. And I would say to you, Mr. Vermeer, that I will personally look to encourage opportunities for an appropriate organisation to do the other half of the job back in Australia that the Foundation's doing here. Could I thank you again for your attendance here today, and we look forward to growing the relationship in a most constructive and friendly manner. Thank you very much.
And he has been a very good partner in any initiative to improve our bilateral relations. With Mr. Morene's words, we will finish this speeches round. Ministro.
Dear host, dear Minister, Ambassador, Secretaries of State, Presidents of the Foundations, distinguished guests. Back in 1606, a Portuguese commander under the authority of the King of Spain was the first Westerner to set foot in the vicinity of today's Australia. His name was Pedro Fernández de Quirós, and he was taken for a fool when he claimed discovery of the mythical Terra Australis. Nowadays, probably to Quirós' surprise, we have daily meetings with nationals from Terra Australis to exchange top-end technology. Despite the distance, the vitality of the commercial and technological exchanges between Australia and Spain has brought new life to business and cooperation. The shift in the bilateral paradigm has been fueled in recent years by a number of factors. I highlight one: the smooth interactions between Spanish and Australian firms. This interaction is due to the major opportunities provided by Australian authorities and companies, coupled with the competitiveness of the Spanish firms going abroad. And here is a second one: the close partnership between the Spanish Armada and the Australian Navy. The recent deployment for 6 months of the combat supply ship Cantabria, thousands of miles away from its home port, was highly successful. And you know that if two different people, or the same people, can live 6 months together in a ship, this is a good odd for the future. It is as well an inspiring example of complementarity between two world-class navies. And a third, the ironclad support of the whole Spanish government. In February 2013, I paid a visit to Australia, the first of the kind by the Minister of Defence. I realized how vibrant and exciting your society and economy are, and the many values and principles we share. Take the case of Afghanistan, the fight against global terrorism, or the importance of maintaining international maritime routes free of pirates. We are together in the long run because of our shared principles and values and, of course, interests. They are the solid foundations for additional economic prosperity. In sum, there has been a change so important that, considering the distinct features of our relationship, I go as far as to say that it is deeper than the many oceans between us, stronger than a naval steel, and all-weather and time-tested. In the stormy seas our ships cross, having a comrade helping out at the rudder is inexpressibly comforting. We are in the same rudder now. Expect anything coming from us in a quick and expeditious manner. Expect support, joint developments, technology, friendship, in one word. Expect it all, we will be there. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very fruitful stay in Spain. Thank you very much.
Chairman Villamir, on behalf of the EABC and Minister Robb, I would like to thank you and your foundation for what is just extraordinary hospitality. Thank you so much. This is our 8th EABC delegation, but I came to Spain on the 2nd EABC delegation 7 years ago. We walked into a room, we had no idea what was going to happen, and we confronted 25 angry Spanish companies complaining about access to the Australian market. And we took two messages from that. First of all, we had to do something, but more importantly, here was a whole lot of companies that wished to invest in our country that needed some assistance. We went back to the then Minister for Infrastructure and said, you have to change the rules. We need greater transparency, we need greater contestability, and if we do that, we will lower the cost to Australia by about 20%. Fortunately, that was taken up, and here we are 7 years later, and this is by far the most important meeting of Spanish and Australian business people in the history of our country. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the modest Minister, Andrew Robb, who, since he's become Minister, has years and years of blockage and backlog has been unblocked. Fancy saying that in the last few months, signing a free trade agreement with Korea, Japan and China, which only leaves a free trade agreement with Europe to go, and we look forward to conducting that. At least that's the position of the EABC. Today's meeting, public figures, private figures, about the Spanish-Australian relationship and the Foundation is a model for our countries. And we at the EABC are extraordinarily proud to have played a role in assisting Spanish companies in Australia and to facilitate this lunch today. And again to Chairman Villamir, who I had the pleasure of having dinner with the Ambassador Jane Hardy and Jason Collins several months ago, where we conceived this very lunch today. And what magnificent surroundings. I have some quite good paintings in my house, but they're not quite like this. As I said, we've also, in the past, had delegations by King Juan Carlos, and as you pointed out today, we're about to see the new King of Spain. This will be the first foreign delegation ever to see the new king, and I must say, Chairman Villarmir, just a few days ago we thought there is no way this will go ahead with the change, but I suspect your hand in the background has helped enormously, and so we look forward to that. We've also had the benefit of the Prado exhibition in Brisbane and in Melbourne. So it's not just a business exchange, but a cultural exchange, and Minister Moraes, more importantly, Spain has become part of our national defence, not just infrastructure, not just water, not just desalination, but part of our national defence, and for that we also thank you and the Spanish people. It is my great honour in front of you on behalf of Australia, and we look forward to welcoming you to the B20 in Brisbane only a few months, in fact next month, but I would like to offer a toast to His Majesty Philippe VI, King of Spain, and to the people of Spain. His Majesty King Philippe and the people of Spain. Thank you. Thank you. Bien, thank you.
Please sit. Very briefly, I want to thank Chairman Walton for the kind words you have just now pronounced. Thank you very much. I hope this lunch will mark a new step in the relation between us, and the relation will be every time better and better. Really, we are most happy having you all here with us today. Thank you to you all for your presence. And I beg you also to take your cups and we drink for the honor of Australia, for the honor of Spain, and for the better relation between the two countries.
Bravo.
Bravo.
Mm.